Hello, welcome to World Civilizations since 1500. Now, today we're starting the third topic of the semester, which is titled The Rise of the Trading Empires. So we're moving in the timeline in world history. We're moving from the 1500s all the way to the 1700s or early 1700s, thereabouts. So during this period of time, what we're going to see around the world is really the formation of very large political entities which are going to be engaged in this process of commercial expansion. Those are the trading empires that pretty much dominated the world economy and to a certain degree impacted human societies around the world in very significant ways. And they're going to serve as a bridge, so to speak, for the emergence of a new world, the emergence of the modern world. So they're going to be also serving as a kind of engine of history. We had already looked at in the previous topic and the second topic, for example, three main forces of history: long distance trade, climate change, and epidemics, really reshaping the world in so many different ways. And now what we're going to be looking at is yet another expression of that, in this case, long distance trade, crystallizing, materializing in now large political, economic, and even military entities that are going to expand around the globe, control certain areas that were engaged in this massive commercial exchange in the network that we examined in the past. They're going to be controlling certain outposts in different parts of the world and also trade routes as well. And we're going to get to see all of that in this topic. So let us turn to our outline. Again, this is the third topic, the rise of trading empires. And the way we're going to approach this topic is by, as the table of contents show, there will be three main parts. The first part will be somewhat brief in that we're going to look at the foundations of the trading empires. In other words, there will be certain preconditions that gave rise to those trading empires, and we're going to get to assess those before we move into part two, which is going to be the extensive part of this topic, which is going to devote to look at a series of trading empires which pretty much dominated the world economy during the years I described. Let's just say from the 1500s to the early 1700s. In this case, we're going to get to see the most significant ones, like the Ottoman, for example, in the Middle East, some European empires like the Portuguese, the Spanish, French, Dutch, and British. We're also going to look at some Asian trading empires, the Mughal Empire of India, and at the very end, we're going to get to also see China. Okay, so as we're going to be moving along, it is important to understand that we are going to look at their trading activities, but also their internal societies, what really gave rise to those empires, what kind of economic functions they played, not only internally, but also externally as well. And as we'll see also, how they impacted other societies and other cultures as they were expanding. Okay, so this is something that we're going to get to assess in each one of those empires as we move along. Now, the last part of this topic, which we're going to leave at the end, more than likely this is something that we're going to cover in the third session of this topic. It is looking at the global impact of the trading empires. Again, they are not only going to have an impact on neighboring societies or communities, but again, on a global scale, they will be altering the course of global history. They will be changing the nature, the character of a series of societies which they interacted as they traded with other societies. Again, those are actually long distance, of course, operations. And so as those empires reach far-flung areas of the globe, they will have an impact on other cultures, civilizations, and of course also on the economies at large, not only the local economies that they impacted or interacted with, but also, again, as a whole, they also are going to create changes in the world economy. This is something that we're going to get to assess at the very end. So this is a very, very important topic that is a sort of like a transition stage towards the modern world. Again, this is really paving the road for modernity and also for globalization as well. It is just accelerating this process of long distance trade that we examine in the second topic. And it's going to, in many ways, alter the way people went about their, for example, economic activities, so what we call work, for example, as we'll see, that instead of people just subsisting from their work, whether those were peasants or farmers just growing, their own food, or artisans and so on, just, crafting their artwork and selling it on the local market, what we're going to be looking at is that around the world, more and more people will be gravitating towards this new economy, this economy based on trade. They'll be now producing for the market, and the market is no longer just a local market or a regional market, but a global market. In other words, producing for exports, that is to say. So again, this is going to be really altering the way people went about doing, work or carrying out economic activities, more oriented towards, the market and commercialization, in other words, of the economy. But also the cultures will be altered as they're going to be, pretty much borrowing and sharing elements from other cultures. We see this process that we saw in the past of, the merge of world cultures and religions as well. This is going to intensify even more during this process. And also just the way that people are going to see themselves and see the world around them as well, it will be altered in very significant ways as people are entering this new age, if you will, of global trade. Okay. And the trading empires will be the engine of change in this case. So this is why it's important to look at. All right, so before we move into part one, let me first and foremost offer an introduction to this topic. As I mentioned, this topic is essential for understanding this process of modernity and globalization. The age of the trading empires from the 15th to the 1700s AD, it's really a time of what is called the first global interface. This is when all of the cultures and civilizations are meeting on a more permanent basis. There's a meeting of peoples that are traveling from around the world. Again, this is no longer just the age of discovery and exploration, but the contact between the civilizations is becoming more and more steady, more accelerated, and more permanent. Okay, so this is really an age that has been termed by historians as the age of encounters. This is when all of the peoples of the world are encountering one another, due to the fact that in the past, people have lived in almost splendid isolation from one another. There were, of course, contacts being made. We examined that again in all the networks that we assess in the second topic. But as I mentioned, those contacts that people were experiencing and carrying out along the networks were rather intimate and limited. Those were actually just merchants, trading with one another in different parts of the world. But this is going to intensify. Now, this is the time when, for example, the Europeans are moving into places like, for example, Africa, North Africa, West Africa, including East Africa, the Indian Ocean, and Southeast Asia as well, eventually reaching the China Sea. This is the time when America was discovered, and we see this process of European colonization of the New World or the Western Hemisphere as well. There's a meeting of different worlds. The Europeans are meeting the Native Americans, the Native Americans are meeting the Europeans. We have, of course, the process of the African slave trade, the massive, export of African slaves into the New World, and that added, of course, to this global interface as well. And also in Asia, we see something similar taking place as Asian societies are now experiencing also the arrival of the Europeans, and there's also a meeting as well taking place of those two worlds. So this is why it's called, again, the Age of Encounters. It's the very first global interface, so to speak. Okay, so those were not just localized encounters the way we examined that in the past, but again, this is becoming more and more a global process, something that today scholars call the early stages of globalization. Okay, the early stages of globalization. Globalization has been an ongoing historical process. This is not just something that occurred or began to occur in the 20th century, 21st century, but rather, again, it's been going on for centuries, for at least 5 centuries or so. We see the economic integration of regional economies into a larger global economy. Okay, so again, the economies are no longer just operating on their own, but rather they're now operating under a larger system, something we're going to get to see again in part 1. And of course, that is really transforming the economies of the world as well, from subsistence to commercial, as I explained. Okay, so once again, it's something that we're going to get to see at the very end of this topic. Again, it is this process of cultural exchange as well. It's important that, how cultures are dramatically altered in this process of commercial expansion with the rise of the trading empires. How, from this point onwards, the cultures of the world are becoming more hybrid, in other words, okay? To the point that today, as we speak today, most cultures, I will say, virtually all cultures of the world are hybrid. Those are cultures that have experienced significant alterations out of this process of globalization, this first interface, so to speak. And so this is something that we're going to be highlighting again and again in this topic, how this is unfolding and how this is giving rise to a whole new world, the world that we can recognize today. All right. All right. So let's look at, first and foremost, the foundations of the trading empires. Those political entities, those were not only political, by the way, those were also economic and also military, by the way, were new kinds of entities, in that the kind of empires that emerged during this time were not just empires that were concerned with controlling long distance trade and expanding territorially, but the nature of those empires were also quite different, in that there were new kinds of entities, because really the leadership of the vast majority of those empires were actually nomads that were the ones that moved into the sedentary societies through this climatic change that we examined in the past, that took place between 850 and the early 1300s, this culling cycle. So all of those nomadic invasions that we looked at in the past resulted in the nomads taking over a series of sedentary societies or civilizations. And as they took over, they became the leaders of those new civilizations, and they're going to be the ones driving this process of uh, territorial expansion, military expansion, and also commercial expansion. Okay, as I, as I said, and I repeat, the nomads were warlike societies. They were very skilled warriors. That was part of their culture and their way of life. And they're going to bring in those skills, those military skills, into those civilizations that they took over. And they're going to create a new kind of machine, okay, in which they're going to merge the skills that they bring in terms of warfare and strategy and so on, and military tactics and the like, merge that with the skills of the sedentary peoples when it comes, for example, to things like agricultural production, state management, bureaucracy and administration and the like. They're going to merge them and create a new kind of machine. Again, machines that were really, again, uh, bent on expansion. Okay, we saw, for example, the Turks coming out of Central Asia, moving into the Middle East, and there we're going to see uh, one group of Turks creating an empire will be known as the Ottoman Empire, and another group of Turks will be moving into the Indian subcontinent eventually by the 1500s, early 1500s, and conquering India and creating the Mughal Empire. Again, those were nomadic groups that were on the move as a result of climate change, and they ended up creating those trading empires. We saw the Mongols as well. You know, the Mongols were really the forerunners of all those trading empires as well when they took over China as well. Now, of course, that empire collapsed during the Black Death um, during the 1360s, and was one of the main reasons why that dynasty, the Mongols, collapsed. But in Europe, we're also going to see a similar process in which groups that were nomadic and warlike that invaded the sedentary societies of Europe and took over them and created a series of warring kingdoms. Eventually, those warring kingdoms will become the greatest trading empires of Europe. We're talking about, for example, the Vikings that raided Europe during this climate change that we spoke, and also the Germanic tribes of Central Europe that were also moving into different areas of the continent and were seizing lands, and they eventually ended up creating their own kingdom. Some of those will be so successful in that they're going to move into the outside and create vast trading empires, like, for example, the Portuguese and the Spanish were really created by a series of Germanic uh, tribes known as the Visigoths, whereas the French, the Dutch, and the British were actually kingdoms that were raided in the past by the Vikings, and we're going to see a merge of Viking with the local elites of the French society, Dutch and British, and there we're going to create, of course, a quite new type of system, a new kind of empire that is going to be more specialized on warfare and, of course, in navigation as well. You know, the Vikings were experts in navigation, so all of those skills will be used to create those kinds of trading empires. So again, first and foremost, keep that in mind. Again, that those are the new nomadic empires, the trading empires that we're going to get to assess in this topic. So those were some of the kind of uh, preconditions, again, for the rise of those types of entities. The other is that we see the rise of new technologies as well. Particularly, those are going to be used for navigation systems. And it is precisely as we see the rise of those new nomadic empires that we see at the same time, almost simultaneously, the introduction, the innovation of certain technologies, like, for example, the compass. We know we talk about that, you know, in the previous topic, the astrolabe as well. This is, again, you know, those are innovations done by Indian scientists, you know, Arabian scientists, Chinese as well. Scientists are innovating, of course, technologies for navigation, for orientation, to orient themselves on the high seas, to read the sky, to study again the positions of the stars, to measure them in order to know where you're going. Again, so this is going to become essential again for the long distance voyages that those empires are going to embark upon as they're moving into different parts of the world to control different trade routes and so on. Again, so also the invention of the rudder. Again, this is the device to actually steer the ship in different direction, and this is going to be essential because prior to that, ships were moving by having people rowing on both sides. For example, also if you wanted to turn the ship as well, you needed to use the rowing patterns as well in order to steer it in any direction. So the fact that we're going to see some major breakthroughs or innovations in terms of navigation systems, this is also going to be a kind of precondition for the rise of those new empires as well. Again, I have, for example, here in this picture, you can see the rudder that is placed at the very, very front of the ship. And this is really the piece that is actually being moved in either direction in order to steer the ship as well. Again, so this is considered by the standards of the day a major, major breakthrough. Okay, that is going to accelerate the pace of trade. Remember, some of the things that this is going to lead to is to the rise of cargo ships. Those are large vessels that will be carrying tons of cargo, whether we're talking about, for example, spices or silks and sugar, including, of course, later on, as we'll see in this topic, slaves and so on. And so what is going to lead to this new era of global trade is precisely a revolution in navigation, larger vessels that can be used to explore and navigate all over the world and transfer merchandise back and forth worldwide. And so this is a stepping stone in that direction. The other major stepping stone was the Latin sail as well. This is another kind of addition, if you will, that is going to add wind power to those cargo ships that I was referring. That, well, yeah, in the past people were rowing in order to propel the ship forward, but that was really, again, just too inefficient, so to speak, if you're really talking about long distance trade. Okay, what you need is to add another force, the force of nature. Okay, wind to your advantage. So in this type of innovation, what we see is a triangular sail that was added to a ship, to a central pole, for example, and that triangular sail, the Latin sail, can be steered in different directions in order to capture different wind currents in your favor. Okay, and once you do that, then the ship will be advancing much, much faster, and this is going to once again revolutionize transportation systems for global commerce. Okay, now you can carry goods. Of course, you will have to really study the wind currents as well, have a very good understanding of those patterns, something that we're going to get to see precisely during this age of this technological revolution. Particularly the Portuguese, they were not the only ones. The Italian navigators were as well very proficient in paying attention to the wind currents and creating accurate descriptions and maps of the different seasons when winds were running in one direction or another, and they were trying to capture those wind currents in order to make long distance journeys as well. In the Indian Ocean, this is something that had been innovated. We talked about that as well the trade between East Africa and the Indian Ocean was part of this process as well. The monsoons, again, that were running north to south or south to north in different parts of the year were also part of this process of uh, uh, scientific exploration of the sea and how it works as well. Okay, so all of those innovations and all this knowledge is coming together again and will be used by the different trading empires to start really moving into the outside and really dominating different bodies of water again in terms of controlling the flow of goods. And another innovation will be used for this purpose as well, for the purpose of controlling certain territories, defending them, or protecting your ships from raids, from rivals, or from pirates, and so on, will be cannons. This is another, again, technological device that initially, when it was invented as a way to shatter city walls. Particularly, again, it's something that will be used in the Middle East, gunpowder, cannons, and they were gigantic, again, devices that will be used for those purposes. And so we see around the 12 and 1300s the use of those cannons, and those are going to be instrumental, again, for the fall of city-states and empires as well. Again, they're going to be falling much, much quicker because whereas in the past, those empires build large fortified walls that protected the cities from outside raids and invasions, now, again, those cities will become totally vulnerable in the presence of that firing power and the artillery, in this case, cannons. And like I said, over time, those cannons will become even more sophisticated. And this is going to lead to the type of cannons that, for example, the Portuguese are going to use to defend their ports whenever they establish trading outposts, or to install them in their ships as they sailed to different parts of the world. They're going to also at the same time use the cannons in order to wage war against other naval parties and naval powers, or to open, of course, trade in certain areas by opening fire and the like. Again, more practical, if you will, form of artillery that is carried on the ship. Again, so all of those innovations are going to revolutionize transportation and also global trade as well. So again, all of those breakthroughs and scientific and technological devices are going to come together to give rise to those trading empires. Again, technology is going to make trade more extensive. Now there's a possibility, of course, to move into the outside because you can travel long distances and the like. But at the same time, because we're also looking at military technology, it's not just navigation, gadgets or navigation accessories and the like that is really transforming navigation systems into merchant fleets, for example. But also we're looking at military technologies will be also used to wage war and will make war even more intensive. And so this is going to become part of a cycle, so to speak, in that as those empires were expanding because of those new navigation systems, they're going to start controlling more and more trade, more resources. They're going to increase their wealth, their treasures. And with that, they're going to increase their armies as well. And of course, with their new naval powers and armies, they're going to start really moving into the outside, controlling more and more the trade and making war more intensive to control more trade. Again, so it becomes part of the cycle. So you control more trade, you increase your wealth, you increase your military capabilities, which you're going to use to open up the system of other societies. in order to maximize profits for, again, once again, and the cycle repeats again, over and over again. Okay, so uh, this is extremely essential, again, to understand the preconditions for the rise of trading empires. Another precondition or foundation for the rise of those political entities is that during this time, as we're moving now into the 1500s and beyond, we see in different parts of the world, for example, in Europe, parts of the Middle East as well, in Asia, whether we're looking at, for example, China or India, uh, certain economic changes taking place on a very rapid scale. And those changes corresponded with the rise of long distance trade. So, really, long distance trade created economic change in different parts of the world. One of them, for example, is that we're going to see the rise of urban centers. Urban centers existed in the past. There's no denying of that. Again, city states, for example, large urban areas, but now they're growing, and they're growing at a faster rate, urban centers, as a result of trade. There's a little bit more wealth, that I just say, and with more wealth, there are, of course, possibility to feed more people, and population is increasing, is on the rise steadily as we move into the 1500s, for instance, okay, and beyond. And in the urban centers, what we're going to look at is the rise of new social classes. Now, those are not really totally new. Those were actually groupings that have existed for thousands of years, artisans and merchants. The artisans were really the manufacturers of every society. Those were the ones that will craft things like textiles or tools, like, for example, the blacksmiths and so on and so forth. Yeah, so artisans have always existed. Merchants too. Merchants were the ones that were just taking one product that somebody made, turn around and sell it at a higher price, of course. Or we'll just go to another location, buy merchandise from a neighboring community and bring it, and then you sell it to your community, also at a higher price. What I mean about new classes is that the artisans and the merchants are becoming a class unto themselves, because they're no longer seen, as we move into the 1500s, as just part of the general population anymore. They're not just commoners, in other words. Okay? They're kind of rising in status. They're becoming a kind of middle class, because in the past there were only two social classes, almost virtually all over the world. Okay? There was really the nobility, so to speak, the landowning elite, the aristocracy. There's so many names we can go about. They control land, for example. They control labor. They were the rulers of society. They were really, again, the top tier of society. And the second class was pretty much everybody else on the bottom. Everybody else, whether you were a peasant, whether you were an artisan, merchant, herder, so on. Again, it was indistinguishable. In other words, they had different economic functions and activities, but again, they formed part of the lower class. But now the artisans and the merchants are rising up to the middle, so to speak, because of wealth, because of trade. The artisans are crafting products for exports now, and they're bringing in silver and gold to their economy, to their coffers, so to speak. So now they're building wealth. They have more means, more resources. Merchants as well. Merchants are engaging more and more in overseas operations as well, long distance operations, bringing exotic products, trying to sell them for coins of gold and silver. And what we see is that more and more people are gravitating towards trade, and they're joining that class. They're becoming merchants. They're participating in that new economic activity, and they do have means as well. They do have gold and silver as well. So they're going to rise to the middle, so to speak. They're not really nobility, they're not really an aristocracy, but they are going to uh, earn a certain respectable reputation within their societies because of their wealth and because they're going to be the ones pushing most of the changes that we're going to get to see in this course as we're going to be moving along the future topics. Many of the changes that brought us modernity will be actually sons of artisans or merchants who were highly educated in this case because they have access to resources. They're going to have access to education as well. Okay. So once again, the artisans and the merchants um, will play a critical role in this new era of global trade. Okay, they're going to be pretty much the active participants of this process. Again, we will be the ones, of course, not necessarily controlling the economy, not by any stretch of the imagination, but they're going to be the engine of the economy in so many ways. Artisans, for example, created their own associations or fraternities, as they were called, forming guilds. This is something we see in India. This is something we see in Europe, in China, for example, the guilds, whereby artisans and merchants, by the way, will come together and form uh, a sort of like uh, chamber of commerce of sorts in which they meet and they agree on certain policies, control prices, control quality of their product, and they help each other. And on the other hand, we see also merchants forming companies as well. Again, this is really the rise of the modern day company, which back during this time was called the joint stock company. Okay, the joint stock company. Those are actually a company of merchants. They come together as investors. They each contribute certain amount of money or capital, so to speak, to form the company. And what they do is that they share costs and risks of an operation. If they're going to engage in overseas trade, well, instead of merchants acting individually and independently, they're going to act as a collective, so to speak, as a group. It will be easier, uh, more effective to do that. And if they're successful in bringing overseas products and so on and sell them, they're going to share also profits as well. So it's a joint venture again. And so this is really the forerunner of the modern day company and also the modern day corporation as such. We talked about also financial institutions arising in like the city states of Genoa and Venice, and they're going to become more and more prominent during this time. We're going to see the rise of banks, not only in the Italian peninsula. This is something that is arising in other places of Europe. This is something that will also arise in Asia as well. And those financial institutions will be financing other merchants to create their own companies, but also they're going to be financing their states, particularly their trading empires will also be financed by those emergent financial institutions. You know, we're going to see the formation, for example, of national banks as well. Again, so this is all part of this process, again, of economic expansion, the new economic formations that are taking place during this time. And what we also look at, again, as a whole, is that there is an emergent global economic system. This is really the system by which many kingdoms, empires, and city states are going to be operating under. Not everybody around the world will be part of the system, but again, this is an emergent global economic system. You know, we can talk now about an international economic system. It will be termed as mercantilism. It is really a system that is introducing the idea that uh, human beings in the world are here for the purpose of bettering their economic well-being. Okay? That it's not just enough to subsist from their work. It's not enough, for example, to just use the land if you're a farmer to grow your own food and feed your family, which is really fundamental. It's not enough to be just an artisan and crafting a product and selling on the local market and so on. Again, that's not enough. It's really, again, a system that is saying, it is also important to accumulate wealth. In other words, to make money. In this case, we're talking about gold and silver. So mercantilism is really introducing a change in the world that is moving the economies, the local, regional, and even the global economies from subsistence to commercial for the market, for a global market, that the global economy, what it is just a huge marketplace. The world has become a marketplace that you can produce something in your area that can be exported and be consumed in other areas of the world. So how do we end up actually making money? Again, accumulation of gold. How do we do that? Well, we can either discover gold, in an area. When you mine it, for example, you discover it, you mine it, and that's one way, again, of building wealth. But since that is, of course, a matter of luck, the other way to actually accumulate wealth, which is gold, is to control trade or to engage in trade. Because by doing that, what you can do is trade some item, some exotic item from a faraway land, for example, that is in demand, and you trade it for gold or silver for that matter. So it's not just gold. Of course, gold is going to be very precious. This is one of the most traded commodities around the world. The means of exchange is becoming really the means of exchange worldwide, okay, under mercantilism. And so this is the kind of new economy that is rapidly replacing the old economies that we explored in the past, the agricultural economies, the tribute-based economies, for example, where people are subsisting from the land, paying tribute to landlords, etc. Now, even landlords themselves, kings, princes, rulers, including merchants, artisans, farmers, they're going to be gravitating towards this new system. Again, trying to make what we today would just say a buck, in other words. In that case, gold coins or silver coins and the like again. So this is going to lead to a sort of gold rush. This is, again, one of the preconditions for the rise of the trading empires, is that those trading empires are looking for gold. Again, how are you going to measure the wealth of a kingdom or an empire? By the amount of gold that kingdom or empire has in its treasury within its realm. Okay, this is what is going to determine whether an individual, like a merchant, an artisan, or a ruler, is rich or not. So again, this is really creating a sort of rivalry or race towards gold, trying to maximize their gold imports by maximizing their exports. Okay? And as I explained, and I reiterate once again, no, the idea was not just bring the gold in, and we'll become wealthy. Remember, this gold will be used also to create a war machine. Again, merchant fleets for commercial expansion, but also navies for opening up trade overseas, standing armies as well. And this is going to lead to a series of wars eventually, because again, there is a competition. There is a series of trading empires that are engaged in this process. And as we see gold accumulated in order to wage war, those wars will be also waged to control trade, and the cycle repeats. You control more trade to bring more gold, and the gold will be used to create a more massive army, and then there will be more wars to control trade, and the process repeats again and again and again. Again, this will be part of a historical cycle, so to speak, that the trading empires will be pretty much trapped in again for centuries. Again, a series of trade wars, for example. Okay, it was part of this process of the gold rush. All right, so let us now look at part two. And part two is going to look at the trading empires. Here, we're going to start with the Ottoman Empire. As I explained, this is the empire created by the Turks that came out from Central Asia, and they're moving into different parts of Eurasia. Some of them will be moving into the Middle East proper, others into the Indian subcontinent. And this is going to be one of the critical empires that will really arise at in the very middle of a world that divided Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, and also Africa. So it's really right there in the very, very center of those regions. So it will play a critical role in the way that world history is going to be moving forward. So this is one of the reasons that I start first with the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so let's start with the Ottoman Empire. And there will be a group of nomads arriving as early as the year 1000 to the Middle East, and they take over the region that today is called the Holy Land, the Levant, for example. And they're going to control the Levant the year 1000 thereabouts. And again, this really initiated one of the very first crusades. Those were actually military campaigns that the Christian Church in Rome initiated to regain the Holy Land from the Turks. Again, there will be armies sent into the Holy Land. There will be battles between the Turks and the Europeans. Again, those were religious conflicts, by the way. And so that kind of started very early on, the year 1000 AD, around that time, the very first Crusades. Now, the Turks, although they were repelled for about a century or so from the Holy Land, they will regain it and they will regroup and they will continue to exert significant influence in that area of the Middle East. And also, as we'll see, they will be exerting a certain influence in Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, okay, in Eastern Europe. And one of the chieftains of the Turks, otherwise named Osman, in the 1300s, is going to create a sort of dynasty that will be the forerunner of the Ottoman dynasty that ruled the Ottoman Empire. As a matter of fact, the word Ottoman actually derives from this chieftain or sultan, as he was known, the Sultan Osman again. When the Europeans heard the word Osman, they call it, or they pronounce it as Ottoman, but it's actually Osman. Okay. And will be, again, this chieftain that is going to start this process of expansion, and it will become a sort of kind of like a tradition of sorts by the Ottomans to engage every sultan, engage in this massive expansion and expanding in almost virtually every direction. For example, in 1352, we see the Turks expanding into Eastern Europe. This is a critical time, I should say, when what we see here in the Mediterranean system that we explored previously is the commercial revolution that led to the spice trade, for example. The Italians are actually bringing in spices from the Far East through their middleman in the Middle East. The Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, for example, Alexandria in Egypt as well. There were major nexus points for the spice trade that was moving into Europe. So Eastern Europe, what today constitute, for example, the region of the country of Greece, Hungary, the Crimea, for example, were essential, in this process of connecting Europe with the spice trade. And this is something that is beginning to be affected significantly by the Ottomans, as they were known. Those were actually Turks under the leadership, again, of the Sultans. And they pretty much conquered the Balkans. Again, this is the region of southeastern Europe. Again, Greece, for example, Hungary, and Crimea. And we see the very early stages, the early formations of the Ottoman Empire. Then, after that, what we see is a further expansion, and this is going to be a major historical turning point in the history of Europe, and that is when the Byzantine Empire fell in 1453, when the Ottomans, under the leadership of Mehmed II, which was really one of the heirs of this line of succession going back to Osman, conquered the capital of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople. This was really the eastern capital of the Roman Empire when the Roman Empire split, back in the 400s AD. So it was a city that many tried to conquer, even the Arabs. It was, I think, 23 different groups and armies tried to conquer the city. It was very well fortified, by the way. It had 3 layers of walls. It was impenetrable. And it seems that it was really an impossible mission to conquer. But during this time, we see the introduction of large cannons, okay? Gunpowder, large cannons, and those new technologies will be used by the Turks to shatter Constantinople, which was really one of the major centers of international trade in the Mediterranean system. Constantinople, again, that really connected Europe with the spice trade. There were merchants from Venice and so on, arriving from time to time in Genoa. And Mehmed II was so obsessed with conquering the city, he used a series of cannons to shatter the walls. And what we have here is not only the use of military technologies, but also religious ideas. The use of astrology and divination, for example. Mehmed II was convinced that his conquest was going to be successful after he received a series of signs from diviners and from prophets and so on at his disposal that this was part of destiny. The red blood moon, for example. There was, during this siege of Constantinople, a red blood moon that apparently, again, signaled, it was like an omen that the city was going to fall, and also that there was smoke coming from the main temple inside of Constantinople. It was almost like it was burning when it was not. There was no fire or anything. It was just a lot of fire, a lot of smoke coming out of it, and everybody panicked, even inside the city of Constantinople, by the way. So they saw it as a kind of like an ominous type of sign, that this was destined to fall. Again, and it fell, and he took control of Constantinople, and this really was a major blow to European politics, because this was a very valuable strategic location for the European markets. Again, so the conquest of Constantinople will lead to the real emergence of the Ottoman trading empire. They're now going to control the trade that is flowing from India, China, Southeast Asia, into the Middle East, and from the Middle East, to Europe and beyond. And as we'll see, they're going to act as like a roadblock, so to speak. They will be obstructing trade with the Europeans. Again, and this is going to lead to the rise of the European trading empires. And, just the presence of this new empire in Constantinople, which they rename as Istanbul, by the way, okay, which is the capital present-day Turkey today. As we move into the 1500s, the Ottomans are now expanding into the Arabian Peninsula. They conquered the Levant, for example, okay, which is really the region of the Holy Land that includes also Syria and Lebanon as well, Damascus, and also what today constitute the entire country of Turkey, all as a whole, again, will be conquered by the Ottomans. Okay, as you can see in this map. Again, this is really gives you a kind of outline of the territorial expansion year by year and century by century. As we're going to be moving into also the 1500s, the Ottomans are also expanding into areas of the Mediterranean world by seizing territories along the north coast of Africa as well, in what today constitute Egypt. It will also become part of the Ottoman Empire, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, for example, all of those areas. So more and more, they're also controlling the African trade as well, because Africa traded with Europe. There were goods flowing from Africa into the city-states of Venice and Genoa. But now the Ottomans are also controlling that trade. So this is going to, once again, pose significant challenges to the Europeans as they're really becoming the major commercial power of the region. And they will deny the Europeans participation, as we'll see. Now, their imperial administration is that at the very top, we have the Sultan. Again, this is really, the emperor descending from this line of succession back to Osman. And they do create a caliphate. Again, they really create an Islamic community as well. They convert to Islam, and they create a new iteration of the caliphate era. We explored the caliphates in the first topic of the semester, like the Umayyad and the Abbasid, for example, that collapsed, the Abbasid in the 1250s. But now they create a new caliphate, and this is a Sunni caliphate. So this is not really led by religious figures or priests, but rather those are just military chieftains or conquerors that are administering this new religious community. Again, they're Sunnis, in other words. Okay, they do create a highly centralized bureaucracy that was very, very well organized. So again, this is really signaling the advent of a new time as well, highly efficient and large bureaucracies to govern the empire, which is becoming too vast to administer, territorially. Okay, and all the major administrators, by the way, were Ottomans. They were Turks. This is very important. They received their appointment directly from the Sultan as well, okay, in the different provinces and so on, that they should administer the towns and the provinces and the like, okay, for tribute collection. They also create, and this is also one of their major contributions to the rise of trading empires, is an elite military corps. They were called the Janissaries or the Janissaries. Okay, this is really made up of really populations that they conquered. They were turned into slaves, and as they were turned into slaves, their mission was to serve the Sultan. They're the personal army of the Sultan. They were following the orders of the Sultan in this case, and they spent all their lives again in that service. It's an entire life of military service. They were forbidden to marry and have children. This is a life of total service again to the ruler. And this is going to be really an elite military society. Again, highly specialized, and they were expert and skilled warriors. Okay, it really, as a whole, across the empire, created a kind of a two-tier society, particularly in the Middle East, where we find, for example, the Ottomans as the rulers and the top administrators, tribute collectors, and so on, at the very, very top. And of course, the Arabs were considered part of the commoner class. Again, not necessarily second-class people or groups, but rather this is just that there was a clear distinction as to who were the conquerors and who were the subjects. In other words, the Arabs were the subjects. However, because the Ottomans control more than the Arab world, I mean, they are controlling the Balkans, they're controlling Christian societies, they're controlling the Holy Land, where there's the presence of Jewish communities. They, as a whole, when you look at the entire empire, we're looking at an empire that consists of a multi-ethnic religious society. Okay, it's multi-ethnic because we find a series of different linguistic groups, different cultures, but also different religious groups as well, Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And because they share really just a similar lineages going back to the prophets, for example, whether we're talking about the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, they do pretty much share religious ideas that were given to them by a series of prophets going back to Abraham. And Abraham, Moses, Isaiah, Ezekiel, for example, Joshua, and the like, again. Because they share that, they're going to a certain degree, be granted a certain degree of religious independence and freedom. The Ottoman Empire, although it was Islamic, was not really the kind of empire that was imposing, for example, the faith on everybody to follow. It kind of left people alone. And part of the reason was practical. It's not only that they share common ideas, for example, Muslims often referred Christians and the Jews as the people of the book. In other words, they do have scriptures that are very similar to our own, and even the Quran, the scriptures of the Muslims, are connected, at least ideologically, theologically, to the ideas of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament of the Christian Bible as well. So they call them the people of the book. I mean, pretty much we share the same, lineage, in other words. And as such, in order to really grant religious autonomy, the Ottoman Empire created a system called the Millet system. What is the Millet system? The Millet system was a system by which every community within the empire was self-governed in terms of their religious practices and religious traditions. Okay, Christians were self-governed in terms of what kind of practices, what kind of rituals and ceremonies they were going to carry out. The Jews as well, again, they lived in their own communities and they obeyed their own religious authorities as well. It's called the Millet system again. So this is the kind of multi-religious, multi-ethnic society that is emerging in the Middle East. Now, when it comes to trade, the Ottomans were indeed a trading empire. They're not just going to be, a military, for example, entity, but rather they are going to expand commercially as well. Again, they are in the very center of trade that connects Europe, Asia, and Africa. Okay, they are indeed in the very middle of a flow of very precious goods that are coming, for example, Asia, like silks, spices. They are indeed also at the middle of products like furs coming from Russia, for example, as well. And they're going to promote trade domestically, but also into the outside. And they will grant merchants significant autonomy as well. They create this idea of private enterprise in that the merchants create their own companies and they're owned by them as well. They just have to pay taxes. Okay, as long as they pay taxes to the Sultan, everything goes well. The same with the religious communities that I mentioned. That's why they were left alone. The Christians and the Jews were left alone because all the empire was actually concerned about was collecting tribute from them. As long as they pay tribute, they can carry out their activities, their ceremonies, and the like again. So the merchants are also enjoying that kind of independence. We also going to see as this empire is formed, and what is called present-day Turkey, a struggle for the Mediterranean trade. There will be a clash, a confrontation between the Ottomans and the Europeans over the control of the Mediterranean Ocean. That system, again, will be now up for grabs, so to speak. And what was really at stake was the spice trade. Who's really going to control the spice trade? The most lucrative, the most profitable trade at this point was really spices, like nutmeg and cinnamon and cloves, black peppers, etc. Different spices that were coming from Asia and were in great demand in Africa and in Europe. This is what the Ottomans are trying to control. And part of this process, why the Ottomans are moving in to try to control it, is because the two city-states that were dominant, the two city-states empires, like Genoa and Venice, were collapsing. And they were collapsing as a result of the Black Death. The Black Death really decimated the populations of Europe. And that led to the collapse of those two cities that controlled the Mediterranean commerce. They really controlled it for many, many centuries. They were dominant. But now there's a power vacuum. If those two city-states are not controlling the trade, then who is going to control it? Again, so there we're going to see a struggle between the Ottomans, on one hand, that are coming from the east part of the Mediterranean world, and another group, the Habsburgs. This is a dynasty that is going to be ruling Spain, and also a dynasty that will be ruling simultaneously with Spain, will be ruling Germany, Central Europe, Austria, for example, and also parts of Italy. There will be a dynastic family that will be creating a new empire, and they're also trying to create a trading empire as well. Again, so the struggle of the Ottomans and the Habsburgs should be noted, was economic, to be sure, the control of the spice trade and the control of the Mediterranean system, but also it was religious, because both are really representing different faiths. The Habsburgs are, Christian, the Ottomans are Muslim, and so what is also at stake is religious expansion as well. Again, so this is also part of the struggle over the Mediterranean. Again, the Catholic Habsburgs have very strict policies. They're not really going to allow for religious toleration, of course. So the areas that they control economically must convert to Catholicism. And of course, the Islamic policies of the Ottomans tend to be, like I said, pretty much just pay tribute and carry out, your activities. So again, they're both pretty much advertising different, of course, ways of administering the empire. And there will be an ongoing battle for the Mediterranean, will be naval battle in the Mediterranean world that will last for about 20 years or more. And as a result of that, there will be a stalemate. No one will emerge as the victor. And the Mediterranean world will be pretty much split in half. The Ottomans will be controlling the eastern side or wing of the Mediterranean system, and the Habsburgs will be controlling the western section. And from this point onwards, the Ottomans are just going to obstruct all kinds of trade. They're going to deny the participation, again, of Europeans in the spice trade. There will be, like a roadblock, so to speak, between Asia and Europe. And again, this led the Europeans, particularly the Spanish and the Portuguese, to look for alternatives, to develop a new trading system, totally new, to circumvent the Ottoman monopoly. They're really thinking about, other options. The Spanish, for example, as we'll see, will be sailing west, and this is going to lead them to the discovery of America. As they're going to be looking for a trade route to the Asian markets by moving west, for example, they will be discovering America. And the Portuguese are trying to develop a trade route around Africa so they can tap into the spice trade in the Indian Ocean. Again, so they're going to be exploring West Africa, the Portuguese again. So again, this is very important, how the Ottoman Empire will eventually lead to change and transformation, particularly in the rise of new trading empires, in this case, the Portuguese, and after the Portuguese will come the Spanish. Let's look at the Portuguese Empire, the rise of Portugal as a major force in Europe. And it will be really the very first empire. The first European empire will be Portugal, in this case, the Kingdom of Portugal. Now, it is very interesting to note that the Kingdom of Portugal is situated in the Iberian Peninsula, and where it is situated, it has a very difficult geography in terms of has poor soil, and what this means is, well, you're not going to have the kind of agricultural production that other societies that have, let's say, very rich type of soil and plenty of rivers, for example, for irrigation, good climate. Again, those are really essentials for a very successful agricultural economy. Here, we don't find that. So, one of the reasons why the Portuguese will be driven to the outside to search for new frontiers, new lands, is precisely because of their poor geography in terms of the scarcity of available lands. There's a lot of mountains as well, and the poor soil. Okay. Now, in terms of the demographics, Portugal comes from a society that was subdued in the distant past by a series of nomadic groups coming from Central Europe. In this case, were Germanic tribes that moved into the Iberian Peninsula more or less around the fall of the Roman Empire in the year 450 AD. Those were known as the Visigoths. So keep in mind, those were Germans, Germanic tribes, the Visigoths, that pretty much pick up the pieces of the Roman Empire that crumbled, and they're going to be seizing different territories of the former Roman Empire and creating a series of kingdoms. So those are warrior societies per excellence. They were nomadic, they were warriors, and they're going to install themselves as the rulers of those kingdoms. Those are again bent on warfare. Very important. And another very important feature of their demography is the religious zeal that the Portuguese developed when the Muslims conquered the Iberian Peninsula in the 700s AD. We see a massive expansion of Islam, something we covered previously, under the Umayyad Caliphate, for example, centered on Damascus. They move into North Africa, and from North Africa, they move into the Iberian Peninsula and conquer the entire Iberian Peninsula. And so what we see after the 700s AD is that because the Iberians were Christians, there will be an ongoing effort to expel the Arabs and to push them out of the Iberian Peninsula, something that took the Iberians about 7 centuries to accomplish. So this was really an ongoing struggle, otherwise known as the Crusades and the Reconquista. La Reconquista, or the reconquest of Iberia, was this process of the Christian armies fighting the Arabs, which were Muslims that were governing again Spain or the Iberian Peninsula, and trying to drive them out again completely to reconquer it for Christianity. So this gave the Iberians as a whole this character that they were engaged on this divine mission, that they were accustomed to warfare because they were warriors, but at the same time that they were doing this for God. The conquest of new lands, the conquest of new territories on behalf of their faith, to spread the faith and so on, that this was part of God's plan and so on. Again, this is going to be central for how the Portuguese, as they're going to be moving out into the world, how they're going to see other societies, particularly non-Christians. Again, they would be trying to convert them to Christianity, before they establish, of course, permanent trading relationships. This is, one of the central goals, spreading Christianity around the world. Now, the Portuguese, in particular, are successful in expelling the Arabs in the year 1147. So they gained their independence. as early as 1147, whereas the other kingdoms of Iberia, what will become Spain, they accomplished their independence much, much later, in the 1400s. Okay, in 1491, as a matter of fact, 1491. And here, the group that ended up driving the Arabs out of this region that will become the Kingdom of Portugal was a group of warriors that ended up creating a royal house. And those are actually chieftains, once again, warriors that commanded the armies. And they create a royal house, a royal lineage, otherwise known as the House of Avis. Okay? And they centered their headquarters in the city of Lisbon, which will become really the capital of the Kingdom of Portugal and the country of Portugal later on. Okay, Lisbon. Okay. Now, because they have a difficult geography, again, poor soil and the like, a lot of mountains, this is a society that is going to be moving into the outside. So they're going to be experimenting with navigation systems very early on, trying to explore the areas of the coastline of Iberia to engage in trade. So what we're going to be looking at here is a society of sailors and seamen and also shipbuilders as well. Okay. And they're very skilled at building vessels, and there will be the ones actually building the kind of cargo ships that are going to be quintessential in this new era of global trade. Again, the large cargo ships, the Portuguese actually developed them. Again, now the monarchs of Portugal really promoted trade inside of the kingdom by granting their merchants also significant autonomy, so to speak, creating an alliance with them in order to sponsor expeditions into the outside. Of course, the merchants will have to remain loyal to the King of Portugal and pay a certain percentage of the profits as well. Again, about 20% or so of their overall profits needed to be paid in tribute as well. But again, there was an alliance between the merchants and the king offered protection to the merchants, sponsored their expeditions, and at the same time, the merchants, acting semi-independent, so to speak, had to pay a certain share, to the monarch as well. And it will be in the 1400s that one of the brothers of the monarchs of Spain, Prince Henry the Navigator, will be instrumental in, sponsoring the very first overseas long-distance expeditions. Trying to, for example, move into North Africa, trying to start exploring the west coast of Africa as well. And he's going to be a major promoter of the creation of the very first academies, the navigation schools, for example, schools of navigation in Portugal, which were really the most advanced navigation schools in Europe. Anybody in Europe that wanted to, study navigation and graduate as a captain, they needed to go to Portugal. And of course, he's integrating all of the technologies that I referred to in the beginning of the session. The rudder, for example, the Latin sail, the cannons, the astrolabe, the compass, and so on. All of those, he is going to start merging them and producing a new kind of vessel, in other words. And now, because there is a roadblock in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Ottomans are now blockading the trade, particularly the spice trade. It is during this time, Henry the Navigator and subsequent rulers of Portugal that are going to be completely committed to find a new trade route to India. This is their mission. As we're moving into the 1400s, after the Battle of the Habsburgs, for example, or even during the battle between the Habsburgs and the Ottomans, what the Portuguese are trying to do is really circumvent the Ottoman monopoly, and they're now exploring the west coast of Africa, the Atlantic Ocean, And they're embarked upon, again, a series of journeys and expeditions to try to find that route around Africa so they can move directly into the Indian Ocean. Once again, this is a totally new system they want to develop. Again, to circumvent that monopoly, they're trying to build a new one around Africa and move directly to India and bring the spices, more quantity at a less cost. Again, because the Ottomans were not only denying, of course, participation, but even before the Ottomans, they had to pay enormous prices, the Europeans, for the spice trade as well. Pay tribute, pay taxes, and the like. Pay high. They were price gouged as well. So they wanted to avoid all of that again. So this is what Portugal is really, really committed to do. Now, we ran out of time, but when we come back, we're going to continue looking at the Portuguese, their exploration of West Africa, their initial encounters with the West African kingdoms, and the development of different trading outposts, their control of different trade routes. And then after that, we're going to be moving into the Spanish Empire. And also after that, we're going to look also at the French as well when we come back. Okay, this is all I have for you. And I'll see you then in session 2 when we come back. Thank you.